Shock, shock, shock. Now, I know that you're not going to be able to believe this, but after passing a $1 trillion tax giveaway for the top 1% in large corporations, the Republican leadership in the Senate has introduced legislation to repeal the estate tax for the wealthiest 1,700 families in America. Got that? New legislation's going to come to the floor, supported by Donald Trump, to significantly lower taxes for the wealthiest 1,700 families in America. That is the top 0.2%. In other words, at a time of massive wealth and income inequality, when the top 0.1% now owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%, when the three wealthiest Americans have more wealth than the bottom half of Americans, 160 million people, when 30 million Americans have no health insurance, when 1 out of 5 Americans cannot afford their prescription drugs, when about half of older Americans have no retirement savings, the Republican leadership has decided that they know the most important issue that we have to deal with, and that is that the very, very richest people in this country are not rich enough and that they need another tax break. Now, let me be very, very clear, because you're going to hear on the radio, you're going to see on TV, you're going to read in the papers a lot of obfuscation and dishonesty regarding this issue. You're going to hear about the death tax, and all over the country, people are going to say, oh my God, I have $20,000 that I want to leave my kids, and these people are going to be taxing me. Thank God that Trump and the Republican leadership are going to prevent that. That is not the case. The legislation that we are talking about applies to the top 0.2%. 99.8% of the American people will never pay a nickel in estate tax. So what this is all about is that my Republican colleagues, once again, that is after $1 trillion in tax breaks to the 1% and massive tax breaks for large profitable corporations, they're back again trying to do everything they can to enrich their billionaire friends and their campaign contributors. You look around America right now, I think the greatest problem that we're facing is not that the rich are not rich enough. Maybe instead we might want to recognize that our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, wastewater plants, water systems, airports, our rail system is collapsing. Maybe we want to recognize that we don't have enough money to pay school teachers a living wage and provide a decent education for our kids. Maybe we might want to deal with the reality that we have thousands of veterans throughout this country who sleep out on the streets. Maybe we want to recognize that working class families all across America cannot afford childcare, and public schools are underfunded. Maybe, just maybe, those issues are more important than a massive tax break, hundreds of billions of dollars going to the top 0.2% of our population. Under the Trump Republican leadership plan to repeal the estate tax, the Walton family happens to be the wealthiest family in America. That's the family that owns Walmart, or that is the family that pays its employees starvation wages. That family, the wealthiest family in America, would get a tax break of up to $63 billion. How's that? At a time when we have so many problems, so much poverty, so many problems with our infrastructure, 30 million people without health insurance, kids can't afford to go to college, young people leaving school deeply in debt. Here is the good news. that the wealthiest family in America, the Walton family, would get a tax break of up to $63 billion. Repealing the estate tax, as Trump and the Republican leadership would like to do, would provide the family of the Koch brothers. Remember the Koch brothers? That's the family that spent some $400 million during the midterm elections to elect Republican candidates. The Koch brothers, under the Trump Republican plan, would get their family would get a tax break of up to $39 billion. The Mars candy bar family would get up to $27 billion in tax breaks, and the Cox cable TV family would get a tax break of some $13 billion. Meanwhile, in the real world, over 99.8% of families in America, including nearly every farmer, every rancher, and every small business owner in America, would not get a nickel in tax breaks, not one penny. Now, why? Why is that? It's because the estate tax only applies to people who inherit over $11.4 million in wealth. No Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, at a time of massive wealth and income inequality, the Walton family and the Koch brothers and other multi-billionaire families do not need another huge tax break. Instead of repealing the estate tax, in my view, we need to substantially increase the estate tax on multimillionaires and billionaires and reduce wealth inequality in America. And that is why this week I am introducing an estate tax bill that would do the exact opposite of what my Republican colleagues and President Trump want to do. Under my legislation, anytime a person inherits an estate in America of $3.5 million or less, that person will not pay a penny in new taxes. They get to keep that inheritance tax free, and that is a population, as I mentioned earlier, that includes 99.8% of the American people. But I have to say, if you are in the top 0.2% of the population that inherits over $3.5 million, guess what? Your taxes will be going up, and that is the right thing to do. My legislation establishes a 45% tax on the value of an estate between $3.5 million and $10 million, a 50% tax on the value of an estate between $10 million and $50 million, a 55% tax on the value of an estate in excess of $50 million, and a 77% tax on the value of an estate above $1 billion. In other words, this bill begins to create a progressive tax system in the United States, which is based on people's ability to pay. This is not a radical idea. From 1941 to 1976, the top estate tax rate was 77% on estate values above $50 million. This bill that I will be introducing would also close tax loopholes that have allowed billionaire families like the Waltons and the Koch brothers to pass fortunes from one generation to the next without paying their fair share of taxes. Under this legislation, the families of all 588 billionaires in America who have a combined net worth of over $3 trillion would pay up to $2.2 trillion in estate taxes. Now, in terms of the estate tax, let me tell you something kind of interesting, which I think a lot of people don't know. This idea of a progressive estate tax certainly was not originated by Bernie Sanders. More than a century ago, Republican President Theodore Roosevelt fought for the creation of a progressive estate tax to reduce the enormous concentration of wealth that existed during the Gilded Age. As Teddy Roosevelt said, and I quote, "The absence of effective state and especially national restraint upon unfair money getting has tended to create a small class of enormously wealthy and economically powerful men whose chief object is to hold and increase their power. The prime need is to change the conditions which enable these men to accumulate power. Therefore, I believe in a graduated inheritance tax on big fortunes, properly safeguarded against evasion and increasing rapidly in amount with the size of the estate." End of quote. That is Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt was exactly right for his time, and his ideas are exactly right for today. From a moral, economic, and political perspective, our nation will not thrive when so few have so much and so many have so little. We need a tax system which asks the billionaire class to pay its fair share of taxes and which reduces the obscene level of wealth inequality in America. The fairest way to reduce wealth inequality, invest in the disappearing middle class, and preserve our democracy is to enact a progressive estate tax on the inherited wealth of multimillionaires and billionaires. And that is exactly what we will be doing. Thank you very much.